Well, I'd say the very first seed of Avatar was a dream I had when I was in college. I was 19, and I had a dream about an amazing forest that was bioluminescent. And I got up afterwards. I was so inspired by the dream, I started sketching it in oil pastel and colored pencils and so on. A lot of people ask me, what's the best advice to someone who wants to be a director? And the answer I give is very simple. Be a director. Pick up a camera, shoot something, put your name on it as director. Now you're a director. I think to sum it up very succinctly, it's make it accessible. Get the audience over that hump of watching a period film where people dress differently and they speak differently, and it all happened 85 years ago, and who cares? And there's only one way to do that, which is through characters that you really love and care about. And we fall in love with Jack and Rose as they fall in love with each other. The thing that got me into filmmaking was the love of that sense of otherworldliness that a film can create in your mind. A lot of people ask me, what's the best advice to someone who wants to be a director? And the answer I give is very simple. Be a director. Pick up a camera, shoot something, no matter how small, no matter how cheesy, no matter whether your friends and your sister star in it, put your name on it as director. Now you're a director. Everything after that, you're just negotiating your budget and your fee. So it's a state of mind, is really the point. Once you commit yourself to do it, then the hard part starts, which is that you have to forswear all other paths, because you can't keep a foot in cabinet making and a foot in directing. You can't keep a foot in one job, and it's a total and all-consuming thing. And I suspect that many of the difficult and challenging things in the world, whether it's research or whatever, certainly in the arts, must be all-consuming, because you're in competition with people who have made that decision, who have committed themselves 100%. You're competing for resources. It's a big coral reef, and it's a big food chain, and you're competing for resources. And you're competing against people who have made that commitment. If you don't make the same commitment, you're not going to compete. It's that simple.
What's the objective of the story? I mean, I'm fascinated by the Titanic and everything real that happened, but you have another obligation. You have an obligation to go beyond that and bring people in to see.
I think to sum it up very succinctly, it's make it accessible somehow. Make Titanic accessible. Not that it's inaccessible in a way, but get the audience over that hump of watching a period film where people dress differently and they speak differently, and it all happened 85 years ago, and who cares? Get them in, get them involved subjectively in the event. And there's only one way to do that, which is through characters that you really love and care about. And we fall in love with Jack and Rose as they fall in love with each other, up on the screen. And then there's a certain point where we realize we're on the ship with them. I'm talking about as an audience, experientially, in the watching of the film. And I think that you can't do that in a docudrama format where you have a multiplicity of characters and you do them all perfect historical justice. We very, very carefully observed the history and carefully observed the detail of the physicality of the film, creating the sets and so on. But ultimately, it's an experience. It's an emotional experience. It's a love story. It's, to use one of my favorite films as a teenager, David Lean's film, Dr. Zhivago, it's not really about the Russian Revolution. It's really about these people in this event that's greater than them. And I think Titanic, my film Titanic, is the same thing.
Well, that's what great novelists do, from Tolstoy and whoever you wanted to write about.
Right. You borrow energy from the chosen setting. And in some way, I think that energy is returned as well, because by being subjectively involved through this love story, I think you have a more emotional appreciation of the event itself. When did you first conceive of the idea of Avatar? What was your inspiration? Well, I'd say the very first seed of Avatar was a dream I had when I was in college. I was 19, and I had a dream about an amazing forest that was bioluminescent. And I got up afterwards. I was so inspired by the dream, I started sketching it in oil pastel, colored pencils and so on. And years later, I started to incorporate that concept into a story. It wasn't Avatar, it was another story. And then years after that, in, let's see, 95, I was looking to tell a story that took place on another planet that I could develop at my newly founded visual effects facility, called Digital Domain. And so I incorporated that concept into a thing I called Avatar. So, you know, in terms of inspiration, there was that. There was every piece of nature photography I've ever seen, every moment that I've spent in a forest up in Canada where I grew up, catching, you know, frogs and snakes and that sort of thing, just, you know, wanting to be kind of one with the forest, which I did naturally as a kid. I loved it. My time underwater, you know, as a scuba diver, hundreds of hours all over the world, seeing amazing colors and reef fish and various animals that got those colors and those creatures got incorporated into some of the plants and animals of Pandora. It just made them really big as opposed to the little tiny ones you'd see on a reef. So the inspiration came from really all over the place my whole life. It also came from my sense of a strong sense of outrage and injustice about what was happening to the natural world, what was happening to indigenous cultures around the world, what had happened to them historically during the colonial period. My concern about the state of the world and the state of nature and of our sort of cultural disconnect from nature. So, you know, there were a lot of things I wanted to say with the film. And, you know, you feed that all, you melt that all down in one big pot and you stir it. What comes out is Avatar.
When did this movie first occur to you? When did you know you were going to do it?
It was 5 years ago. I had you know, been studying Titanic, the history of it a little bit, and I'd been following the, you know, the discovery of the shipwreck and all that. And I just sort of got this idea to do a love story set on Titanic with the wraparound, you know, the bookend of the shipwreck. And I literally sat down to make some notes on this for the first time. And the next day, I got in the mail an invitation that was a black card that said in red letters Titanica, and it was an invitation to a friend of mine was the underwater photographer on The Abyss, and he had done a special on the making of the IMAX film. And so I went to see that, and I saw these 2 Russian submarines, and I said, I can use those. You know, as the great opportunist, I said, I can use those. I can go to Titanic. And so the next day, or within a few days, we were on a plane to Moscow to go make the deal for the submarines. And then it took a while to actually get the film started. I actually made True Lies in the meantime. But it's been 3 solid years for me working on this picture.
You made 12 dives to the site of what now is the burial ground of the Titanic.
Right.
I didn't think I could outdo Alien for pure shock. I don't think anybody could. You know, it certainly has been tried a great number of times, and nobody's really done it. I mean, going into a movie theater on opening night, not knowing what to expect, the mystery, the wonder, and then the sudden shock and terror that film created, you can't beat that. So I had to come up with an end run around that would be equally entertaining for an audience, but in a different way. And I knew I could do action. I knew I could do white knuckle action, that I could turn the screw tighter and tighter in an action sequence. So I figured, all right, let's do that. Let's jump off from the horror premise into what ultimately becomes an action film. You know, I don't think Ridley liked the fact that I came along and kind of, you know, trampled around in his little world that he'd created. And now as a filmmaker, having made the 2 Terminator films and then seeing others work in the same sandbox, I know what that feels like.
The notion that you make magic so that people come in to the theater and they get an experience beyond what they might otherwise have.
Yeah.
Tell me what you set out to do.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you say that, because when I think of what it was like for me in my sort of formative years, you know, as a teenager, kind of figuring out what the world was all about, you know, going to films and seeing and getting taken through that doorway into another world, whether it was science fiction or the past or just some other place, some other people, you know. And I think of what that meant to me at that time. And I think so many people in Hollywood, and I don't mean to diss Hollywood in any way, but they've lost touch with that sense of transport, you know, an almost religious transport that a movie is supposed to have. And I'm not saying that all films need to do this, but, you know, the thing that got me into filmmaking was the love of that sense of otherworldliness that a film can create in your mind and in your emotions.
Some place that you cannot.
Exactly. You know, out of your daily life into some place or some feeling. Sometimes it's not another place, it's another emotional place.
I was hired to direct a film called Piranha 2. I was hired by a very unscrupulous producer who worked out of Italy. And he put me with an Italian crew who spoke no English, even though I was assured that they would all speak English. And I actually had to learn some Italian very quickly, and I'm talking about in 2 weeks, because that's all the prep time I had, because I was actually replacing someone else. And I was put into an untenable situation, and then fired couple of weeks into the shoot, and the producer took over directing. And it turns out that he had actually done that twice before on his 2 previous films, and that was his modus operandi in order to get the financing and then axe the director. And in the course of throwing me off the movie, he never showed me a foot of the film that I had shot. He held on to the dailies. He wouldn't. We were shooting in Jamaica, and I would shoot in Jamaica. The dailies would go to New York, be processed. He'd fly to New York and look at them and not send them back for me to see. So I wasn't even seeing my own film. So he basically came in and said, "Your stuff doesn't work, doesn't cut together. It's a pile of junk, and you're off the movie." And then he took over the film. And I thought, I really don't. I mean, okay, maybe I'm just bad. Maybe I'm just not good. So I went to, a couple of months later, I went to Rome to find out sort of the truth, like what really happened. And he wouldn't show me any of the film. And I had been in Rome prepping the film for a couple of weeks before we went, and I remembered the code to get in, and so I went in and I just ran the film for myself. And it wasn't that bad. Because all I wanted to know was just one simple fact. Could I or could I not do this job? And I made a few changes, before I flew back, which I don't know if they ever caught. I don't know if the editor ever noticed that I actually fixed a couple things. But I had to know whether what they had said was true. So here's a case where everyone around me had basically said, "You stink, you suck, you don't know what you're doing," and I accepted it. But then a little voice kept saying, "I don't think so. I don't think it could be that bad. I remember doing some pretty cool stuff with the actors in this moment and that moment." And I looked at it, and it was fine. So then I thought, you know what, I actually can do this, and I just fell in with a pack of thieves and wackos here. But I also realized that I was going to have to get busy and create my own thing, that nobody would hire me after that experience. Nobody would hire me and just put me on a film. I'd have to create my own thing and hang on tenaciously to that in order to be able to direct again. And that's why I wrote The Terminator, and I had many, many people trying to buy that script, but I wouldn't sell them. I wouldn't sell the script to them unless I went with it as the director. And of course, that was a turnoff for almost everybody. But we did find one low-budget producer who was willing to make the film, and that was John Daly at Hemdale, and that's how I got my real start.
How do you get to be the director? I mean, where do you come from? How do you do that?
Now, where'd you grow up?
I went straight from being a truck driver to being a film director.
Is that true?
Is what happened, yeah.
No
Yeah,
kidding.
Exactly. All you got to do is stand there and say, "I'm the director."
Yeah, but did you go to film school or something?
No.
Nothing?
No. Well, what I used to do is I was working as a truck driver. On the weekends, I'd drive down to USC. I lived in Los Angeles.
Right.
Or I lived in Orange County at the time.
A truck driver?
Yeah, I was a truck driver. I'd drive down to USC. I'd go in, and for the cost of the Xeroxing, I would Xerox all these doctoral dissertations on optical printing and film stock, film emulsions, and all that stuff. Build up these big binders of how everything was done. I was like a total gearhead. So I gave myself a full college education for about $120.
Wow.
So you're saying while you were a truck driver,
Yeah.
you were just fascinated with sort of how they did special effects and that kind of stuff, but it was
Yeah.
a hobby for you.
Yeah, it was a hobby.
You never dreamt of being a filmmaker?
Oh, no, I was starting to get serious about it. I
Right.
just hadn't busted a move yet.
And how old were you at this point when you were being driving the truck?
24, 25.
Really?
I was married, lived in a little house.
And you're
white
like
picket fence.
you're a regular guy.
I was a regular guy.
Regular guy.
living
Make it
a
a-
suburban
I'm still a
lifestyle.
regular guy.
So you're telling me, you're driving a truck.
Yeah.
How do you make the transition to be the director of...
Yeah, how do you get on a set?
And was your first movie Terminator 1?
I got hired to do this film called Piranha 2, and they fired me after 10 days.
And what did you get hired to do?
Direct it.
Direct it.
Yeah.
Piranha 2?
Piranha 2, yeah. It's the absolutely the best flying piranha film ever made.
Was it a Jaws ripoff?
Yeah, absolutely.
Never give up, because it's going to be unbelievably hard. It's going to be a ridiculously brutal uphill fight all the time. And you just have to have tremendous stamina and self-confidence to power through it. You have to not listen to the naysayers, because there will be many. And often they'll be much more qualified than you and cause you to sort of doubt yourself. But what I learned from those early days was to trust my instincts and to not back off, because when the hour gets dark, your instinct is to, or your tendency might be to say, well, this is just too hard, and nobody should have to go through this in order to accomplish X, whether it's a movie or whatever. But in the pursuit of excellence, and I think you can be in the pursuit of excellence when you're working on a low-budget science fiction horror film, if it's how you define it, you have to go all the way. First rule is you can't do it all yourself. Even though you may know how to do many of these different tasks, you physically can't do it. And you need a team, and you need the respect and the trust of that team.
Tell me about the difficulties of making the movie, and the financing and sacrifices you had to make to get it on the air, and what your determination was.
That'll be a mouthful.
Right. Tell me about that. And how do you go about making this kind of movie? Okay. Now that you've got your story set, now you've got your character set, now you've got your actors set, now you got to make a movie.
Well, it all starts with the pitch, right? So I go in and I sit down at 20th Century Fox and I say, okay, guys, here's the picture, all right? It takes place in 1912. It's a period drama. We can't have any stars because the characters are too young, and it's probably going to cost north of $100 million. And everybody dies at the end, and there's no sequel. No sequel possibility. What do you think? Right. Sound good? And they're like, let us think about this. Yeah. No, it's difficult.
So you told them right up front, we're talking about more than $100 million.
3-hour movie, more than 100.
And if you make a 3-hour movie, that means that it can't be played but so many times in a theater, and they're not thrilled about that.
Exactly. Plus, you can't have a toy line sprung out of it. You can't have indefinite number of sequels. Theme park attraction is right out. Yeah. You go in, but you don't come out. But so it's a tougher sell. It goes against the grain of Hollywood wisdom to do a picture on this scale, in that budget range, without all of those things that give them comfort.
So what do they say?
Let us see the
They
script.
said, you're James Cameron, go.
Well, yeah, there was a bit of that, and I have
because
a good.
You had a little deal with them anyway.
I have a relationship with them, and they trust me, and we've gone into precarious places before and come out of it looking good. So, it held them back that one step, and I said, let me write the script, and I'll show you that. So then they read the script, and they're literate people. They could see it on the page. They could run the picture in their head, and they said, you know what? We really hate it that we like this so much, because now we're going to have to make it.